Welcome to Real Health with me, Carl Henry. Folks, what behaviours trigger anxiety? What can we learn that can help break them? And how do we live calmer and less anxious lives? In his new book, Addicted to Anxiety, How to Break the Habit, psychotherapist, former NHS Mental Health Lead and Sunday Times best-selling author Owen O'Kane helps the reader understand anxiety from the perspective of addiction. Owen, welcome back to Real Health. How are you?
Thanks, Carl. I'm good, really good.
You've been a busy bee, my friend.
Busy. It's been a busy year, but all good. I mean, I can't complain. It's a good busy, but ready for a break now, I must say. I think in the next week or two, I'm going to bring it down a few notches.
And we're going to chat about that, how important that is later on. But you've had a huge reaction to the book, haven't you? Like Addicted to Anxiety. Not challenging is the wrong word, but a brave title by comparison to some of your other books.
I mean, there were a number of discussions. I was clear I was going to do an anxiety book. 100%. That's what I wanted to do, because I do think it's the epidemic of this generation. You know, and I don't say that lightly. I do believe a lot of people are genuinely struggling, more than I've seen in a long time, more than I've seen in my career. But I wasn't prepared, and I didn't want to do some fluffy heal your anxiety in a day or some bullshitty false promise. I thought if I do an anxiety book, I want it to be raw, real and practical, actually, because the reality is, and this is the part that's hard to hear, most of us play a bigger part in our anxiety than we realize. Most people think of anxiety that's something that's happening to them, which is true to a point. But we often get engaged with the anxiety, and we often become addicted to the thoughts, the emotions, the behaviors that we try to use to manage it. And then themselves can be a big part of the maintenance of anxiety. So I thought, if I do it, I want to do something that's worthwhile, realistic, and something that I see work every day in clinical practice. And I'm totally convinced there is an addictive component to the process of anxiety. So this was a book. So kind of unapologetically that this was a book I was going to do, and I wouldn't waver on it. I mean, there were attempts to try and get me to change the title and go softer, and I kind of thought, no, this goes to a publisher who believe in the concept and believe in the work, and so I went for it, and thankfully people have got it. It's not offensive, it's not judging, it's kind of recognizing that there's something quite alluring and addictive about anxiety that most people, I think, at some level get.
And why is that? So, like, why are we hooked on it? Does it give us a dopamine hit? Does it?
No, I mean, it's not like you don't run off to your local dealer on the corner to get a hit of anxiety. But here's the interesting thing: is anyone who's got an addiction of any description will describe like a love-hate relationship with it. So they will say, "Oh, I need the cocaine, but actually I hate myself afterwards." So there's always that love-hate. Now, anxiety in itself comes with a promise. It promises safety. It promises security. So that is, for most people, quite tempting, but the feelings that come with it are really uncomfortable. So anyone who understands or knows anxiety will know that those feelings, the knots in your stomach, the mind in overdrive, the body just feeling like it's wired the whole time, it's not a comfortable way to live. But when you try to move people beyond it as a therapist, they normally resist and struggle. And let me give you a brilliant example. I had a client a couple of weeks ago, and she came along. She's doing really well, and she said to me, "Owen, I feel great." She said, "First time in 4 years, I woke up the other day, didn't have the knots in my stomach." And I said, "Brilliant. It's great to hear." And then she went quiet for about 10 seconds, and she went, "It is, isn't it?" And then she said, "But then," I said, "I sense there's a but coming." And she said, "Yeah, there is." And she said, "I then started to worry about why I didn't have the knots in my stomach." And I think that in some ways encapsulates what happens. And then somebody else say, I was doing a talk last night in London, and someone put up their hand and says, "Is it weird that I worry when I'm not worrying?"
So, is that just how we live now, right? That we're always just a bit worried, and that it's normalized almost. Just being anxious is kind of normal.
Yeah, and I think it's okay. Like, anxiety in itself is not a bad thing. Anxiety is a normal mechanism. It's healthy. Some degree of functional worry in all of our lives is useful, and there's nothing abnormal about that. But I guess what I see in practice is that most people, normal worry goes beyond that, where it becomes exaggerated worry or exaggerated fear, or they feel like they're heightened the whole time. And I think this is where the addictive component for it, for me, comes in. And I guess I describe it in the book as like everyone's got that part of them. They've got a part of them that frightened self, frightened little fella, little girl, little person within them. And often they treat it like it's an enemy or a bad thing. So a big part of this book is, you start working with your anxiety. It's not an enemy. It's not a bad thing. It's there to protect you. It means well, but it's highly exaggerated. It's working way harder than it needs to. So your goal ultimately is to form a better relationship with that part of self rather than run away from it or abandon it or try and push it down, which is what I see a lot of people do.
So
So
it's very much recognizing it and owning it, I suppose, taking ownership of the fact that you realize that you are anxious
yeah,
and working with it as opposed to trying.
working with it,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's kind of like if I'm working with people in a group and stuff, this might sound a bit wishy-washy, but there's some real power in it. I get them to imagine that their anxious self, whatever that looks like, sits down beside them on a wall, and I say to him, I just want you to allow it to be there, and I just want you to listen to it. And it's really incredible to see the responses. Most people get a bit emotional, or they're so used to pushing it away or trying to get rid of it that it evokes a really strong response in them. So, right, like if you see anxiety as an enemy, that's exactly what it feels like. And that's what it becomes in your life. Whereas you see it as okay, this is a part of me that is real and it's tangible. It's not like treating a kidney or a lung. Anxiety is much more nuanced than that. And this is kind of where this book differs from most of the other stuff out there. It kind of doesn't just treat it as this mechanical, oh, this is what your brains do. And that's part of it. That's a neuroscience, the neuroscientific part of it. But we're not neuroscientific, we're beings, we're human beings. So it's much more nuanced than that. It's about get to know the part of yourself, get to know the thoughts, get to know what emotions come up, get to know the behaviors that get in the way, get to know the behaviors that actually help you move forward. So in some ways, you become the expert in your own anxiety, and I think that's where the breakthroughs lie.
And of course, sometimes anxiety is a very powerful thing. I would myself podcasting, for example, I'm anxious every time I go up into the podcast studio, but it enables me to perform. Or if it's a corporate event, I'm petrified, but then it enables you to rev up and to perform on the stage or perform on TV or whatever, or the podcast, whatever it may be. So like there is a positive element to it. I'm sure David Beckham, when he took a free kick when he played, was very anxious taking the free kick, but it got him to kick the ball where he wanted to put it.
Absolutely. So that it can be. There are a lot of people who are high functioning with their anxiety, so there can be a part of it that's useful. I'm probably similar to you. Every time I do a big gig or a talk, my anxious self will come out and it will tell a story. What if you forget? What if they don't like it? What if they boo you off? And it's doing that because it's saying, okay, it would be safer for you to stay at home and not do this. So it's well-meaning. So it comes with a very primal, basic, stay at home, don't take any risk. It'll be safer and it'll be easier. But of course, every time you do it, you just become familiar. You think, oh, I recognize that voice. It's just my anxious self. So of course, you're very often working with it. I mean, I make a point that every gig I do, if I get anxious about doing it, I will bring the anxious self with me. So it's like taking a toddler with you and saying, right, come on, you're coming along, and I unapologetically bring it with me and say, you can join me here, and we're going to enjoy this here. We're not going to turn it into a disaster, so we're going to enjoy it. So even that in itself, it sounds like a really simplistic thing, but that was transformative for me. That when I realized that this didn't have to be a bad thing, this can be something that I work with and get really familiar with.
It sounds like it's very much back to control, isn't it? Like you're taking control of it and bringing like that idea of the toddler walking on stage with you when you're nervous. It's controlling the emotion of it and not.
It's a good point. I wouldn't use the word control.
I'm quite, as you know me long enough, right? I'm quite the control type. I would use that word, which is probably the wrong word to use, so correct me.
No, but it's a brilliant word because actually most anxiety is about control, isn't it? And anxiety by definition is an intolerance of uncertainty. So if you're intolerant of being uncertain, or if you're intolerant of not knowing, or you like to be in control, then of course people who are anxious very often try and take that dominant lead and control the anxiety. Whereas actually I'd see it different. I'd say, no, it's actually learning to ally with the anxiety. So I don't force a little anxious fella on stage with me. I bring him along, I encourage him and say, no, this is all right. It's safe. We're going to have a good time. This is a really good thing that we're doing here. So it's kind of developing, it's less controlling. It's kind of more it's a much more negotiable relationship, and it's kind of got a bit of give and take. So you're recognizing with that self, okay, I know why you're here, and I appreciate you showing up to look out for me. But, let me explain what's happening. So it's a much, much, much more collaborative is the word I'm looking for. So rather than control, I would say collaborative.
And and people who've been listening to, we're 6 years on air. Our regular listeners
You
will
say
know.
tomato, I say tomato.
I have a thing for between my fridge and everything else. I have a thing for organisation and control. I was going to ask you about other daily behaviours then for people. So that's obviously one. So if someone's nervous getting on a crowded train, you know the idea of to bring it with you. What other kind of daily behaviours can people bring into their lives to help manage the anxiety?
I mean, look, if I were to give it in kind of snapshot, what are the key things that help? I would say, look, just be aware of the mind, so that the anxious brain will often be filled with what if, what if, what if. And most people will relate to their thoughts as if they're a fact and as if they're real. So kind of one of the key things around thinking is that when you're aware of the anxious brain being in overdrive, remember that most of those thoughts aren't driven from any facts whatsoever. So you don't need to get engaged with the thoughts. So in some ways, what you're teaching people is that you can get out of your own way. When you notice your mind's in overdrive, you don't need to get aligned with it. You can watch it and you can see it for what it is, but you don't need to get over involved. I would say from the emotional point of view to remember that most people with anxiety, even though they get quite attached to it or addicted to it, they will also spend a lot of time and energy trying not to feel it or trying to move it on. And I think the key thing to remember is that every emotion has a beginning, middle, and end. So an emotion has a journey to take. And if you're spending most of your time jumping in front of the emotion, trying to block it, stop it, push it down, then it's almost like a pile up on a motorway, because all of these emotions are piling up because they're not getting through. So again, it's a case of, you're never ever trying to get rid of the emotion. You're not. Somebody said to me something brilliant last night. She said, "Oh, I'm doing everything. I'm doing ice baths. I'm doing yoga. I'm doing meditation. I'm doing hiking." She was doing some special breathing. She was doing everything. And I said to her, "God, that's a lot, And she said, "Oh, I do." And I said, "Why are you doing it?" And she said, "To get rid of the anxiety." And I said, "And that's exactly why you're not getting rid of the anxiety, because you don't want to get rid of the anxiety. You want to work with it." So remember, the emotions kind of need to follow through. And then I think the behaviors are important as well. This is a book about taking responsibility, and you know this better than I do, but the foods that we put into our body are important. Anxiety is a condition. It's an inflammatory condition. So an inflamed brain, an inflamed body means an anxious state. So if you're putting foods into your body that are highly inflammatory, it's going to have an impact. I think it's the decisions you make, the people you have in your life, your boundaries, how you manage your time. All of these things are these are the day-to-day kind of basic foundational stuff, but it's the recognition that these are, these platform stabilizers are really, really important. And also, as well as anxiety will sometimes instinctively say to you, seek reassurance. Don't do that, avoid that. And these are what we call safety behaviors. So you're often going the other direction, because the more reassurance you seek, the more anxious you're going to become. The more you avoid a situation, the more it's going to become fearful, so you move towards it. The more you take that extra glass of wine every night to numb the anxiety, that anxiety is coming back because all you're doing is pushing it down. So it's kind of all of these small tweaks and adjustment can be really powerful at helping you gain more ownership and realizing, all right, I can work with this much better. Whereas what I see in practice, like every day in my career, is most people's efforts. This gig I did last night, I asked them, there were, I don't know how many people were there, but it was a big crowded room. And I said to them, how many people in here feel negatively about their anxiety? And every single person in the room put up their hand. And I said, and there within is a problem. We're feeling anxious about a very normal part of us and a very necessary part of us. So, that relationship change is important. And also being mindful about how you talk to yourself. Most people beat themselves up, give themselves a hard time, self-attack because they're having anxiety. But it's like, no, you go the other direction. That doesn't help. That just creates more obstructions. So all of this essentially is about get out of your own way.
And of course, coming back to the ice baths, which are very trendy and popular at the minute, they're all over Instagram. Where you get your advice around the anxiety is important. I know you have the story in the book about the PT you overheard, which wasn't really very important to say. That you overheard, talking about it to their client. And again, I'm sure you see it time and time again on social, which is, take an ice bath and whatever. It cures everything. It doesn't.
Yeah, and look, don't get me wrong. Some of this stuff online is great. There are people out there doing some really good work, and there's a lot of well-intended stuff around. However, I'm not a cardiologist, so I wouldn't think it was appropriate to go online and give people advice on what to do for their heart, because it's not my area of expertise. And I think what we're seeing a lot of, particularly around mental health, is we see a lot of generic advice being given, and I see a lot of stuff around anxiety. So this guy I was talking to you about at the gym, he had put 5 tips for managing anxiety on a board at the gym, and every tip he gave goes against the clinical evidence. It was actually tips that would have maintained your anxiety. Now, shorter term, it would have given you relief. You would have got rid of it quickly, and you would have numbed it a bit. But actually, when you do that there, it's coming back, and it's coming back more ferociously. So even though the tips were well-intended and well-meaning, I think around any of this stuff, just check your source, make sure it's coming from evidence that's pretty decent and well-researched, rather than some notional, a therapist I had years ago, she had this notion that a green tea was the answer to everything. If that didn't last very long, but
well, the whole of Ireland has the notion that a cup of tea is the answer to everything.
A cup of tea to everything, that's different. That's sacrosanct. You never challenge that.
But in that fitness space, though, we do see it, don't we? We see, and I've my own opinions on this, which is that the extreme stuff. And we saw them during COVID as a coping strategy and mechanism for anxiety, presumably around COVID and lockdowns and stuff.
Yeah.
Doing marathons on balconies and all kind of hard, not even hardcore, but just extreme. Yeah. We do see that in the fitness space in terms of like 75 hard, that David Goggins kind of message of to push through, go hard, go hard, go hard. Some of the events that are on. And you see that on social, and people talk about, oh, it's great for mental health. It's not really, because they're running from the anxiety as opposed to dealing with it.
I know. And I think I agree with you in that. And I feel 100% strongly in that. There's a lot of stuff out there that is about, getting rid of anxiety or healing it. And it's like, there's nothing to heal, because it's a part of you. It's a very healthy part of self. Sometimes it just works way harder than it needs to, but there's nothing to be got rid of, or there's nothing to be healed. It's about actually forming a new relationship. And I do think there's a lot of extreme stuff out there that delivers false promises, and I can see why it's appealing, because, I certainly know what anxiety feels like, and it's not bloody comfortable. It does feel very, very uneasy, and it's not a comfortable way to live. But actually, if you're willing to go to the message of anxiety, what's it trying to communicate? Because I often think that's the key thing that people miss. The anxieties may be trying to communicate something about maybe you need to slow down a bit. Maybe you need to reevaluate. Maybe you need to readjust. Maybe you need to rethink a part of your life. Maybe you need to balance a bit more. So if you listen to what the anxiety is trying to communicate, that's a more powerful thing, rather than this kind of run 200 miles up and down Ireland to get rid of your anxiety. I mean, that would be a book probably next year.
Is there a honeymoon phase to it, though, that when people do those type of changes, that say for the first whatever, be it a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, they do feel fabulous, and they're like, oh, that it's working, and then there's a lag to that, presumably.
Yeah, there is, and in the book, it's divided into 3 sections. The first part is understanding the mechanics of all of this. Second part breaks it all down much more specifically, and the third bit talks specifically about that there is this danger phase almost, and you see it in therapy all the time when people start to feel better and they start to progress, that then they think, oh, I'm good now. Where actually there's always that danger of relapse, because these issues we all live in the real world. Challenges are going to continue to come our direction, both from the external world and the internal world. So there's never a period when we're all sorted and we're all together. And I guess for me, the argument is you're always working on this, not just as a reactionary thing or in the moment when things are tough. It becomes a way of life, that you're actually making these decisions. Okay, how do I steady the internal platform on a regular basis, so that if a big storm does come your direction, then you're ready to cope with it and you've got the resources, as opposed to trying to scramble to sort it out while you're in the middle of a crisis, which is much, much harder. So the maintenance work is like at the heart and soul of this here. It becomes, if you want a calmer, healthier life, generally it's about that. That's going to involve a lot of commitment and changes on a regular basis, not just in the key moments.
In the book, you mentioned that you don't like goodbyes.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that.
It's a really weird thing, actually. I think it's something I've always had, actually, and I think I say that towards the end of the book. That I'm just I struggle with endings. And I think it's just one of those quirky things I have. I'm the worst person. If I go to a party, my other half will say, he talks about doing a French exit, you'll get out the door quickly. Whereas I'll just jabber and I just find goodbyes difficult, or particularly like longer goodbyes. If I'm not going to see somebody for a year or two, or even longer. I find that very, very difficult. Always have done. I mean, I'm sure it's some of my own early anxiety stuff around attachment and creating safety. I like stability. I like predictability. I'm a perfectionist. I like to know what's happening, and I kind of think I'm very, very aware of my own sort of when things change. It's kind of like I find that a bit unsettling. I think most people do, but it plays out for people in different ways. And I think for me, it plays out when things are coming to an end, or goodbyes are coming, particularly with bigger endings. If there's a project coming to an end, or I'm leaving people for a while, I find that unsettling. So that's the part of me that likes stability and control.
And what would you like people to get from the interview that we've chatted about? We've covered a lot of ground in a very short space of time. In terms of key takeaways from the chat that we've had, we often ask guests that who are experts in their field, and when people listening in, what would you like them to get from our chat?
A couple of things, really. I think the first thing is, if you're struggling with anxiety, you're not a problem. You're not disordered. I don't like the word disordered. I think we should scrap it. I think this is a normal human mechanism, and that you can improve. And I say that with 100% confidence. If you're struggling with anxiety today and it feels overwhelming, or you feel stuck, or you feel that you're not in the driving seat of your life, that is not the reality. That's just a feeling. So that wherever you're at the moment, that there are possibilities for this to improve significantly, and that's going to involve time. It's going to involve patience. It's going to mean that you have to show up and take responsibility. This is, if you're looking for a fluffy, quick fix, repeat a mantra 3 times a day and you're good to go. I'm sorry, it's the wrong book for you. But if you're willing to show up, put the work in, and show up for yourself really unapologetically, then there's probably something in Addicted to Anxiety that's going to be really useful for you.
I love it. It's fast. The more we've interviewed people, and we're 6 years at it now, the more experts have very similar approaches to things, which is, you've said it there, which is, if you're willing to put the work in, if you're willing to turn up, if you're willing to see it as a long-term project as opposed to a quick fix, these are the things you need to do. And whether it's fitness, or whether it's food, or whether it's psychology, or whatever, all the experts in all their specific areas pretty much say the same thing. Which I love that there's a common bond amongst them.
I think that's our experience, isn't it? Yeah. Because most people, when they rock up in therapy, will come, and at the beginning they'll say, my life, whatever's going on, but they'll come in and say, my life's shit, or whatever, I'm overwhelmed, and they will always say it's because my wife, my husband, my job, my boss, my childhood, my family. They will give a list of very valid reasons why they're struggling. But nobody ever in my career has ever sat down and said, I'm feeling shit because of how I'm managing my life. That rarely happens. Rarely. I don't think I've ever had a client sit down and say, I need to take ownership. I'm fucking up here. I'm getting this wrong. People tend not to do that. They tend to externalize it all. And I guess, people like myself and colleagues and people in, experts in whatever area, I think what they've probably learned is that no one's coming to rescue you. It does involve, we can put out information, we can give you our experience and what we see working, but actually it does involve you and I think that's a real thing that we need to, talk more about. Actually, no, this is not just a quick fix. There is no magic wand here. It means that you have to dig, you got to dig a little bit deep here and work out a way forward. I mean, I can certainly help somebody and I can guide as much as I can, but I'm never going to jump in and rescue. They got to do the work, because that just creates a really unhealthy pattern.
Yeah, I think it's, and the older I get, I think it's what separates experts from influencers. That's where I get to it. That the influencer will sell you the patch, and the expert will sell you the real solution to it.
Yeah, and I guess that's where I was at with this book. Really, I mean, there were conversations in the early stages, but before I went to Penguin with this book, and I just wasn't prepared or willing to to give a fluffy version or a false promise of this here, because I just think, one, it's not true, and secondly, you compromise your own integrity if you put out stuff that isn't real or stuff that you don't believe in. You know, I'm too old and wise for that.
Myself included, my friend. Owen, it's been great to catch up with you. Thank you so much for coming back on the show. Your new
Thanks,
book,
Aaron.
Addicted to Anxiety, is out in bookstores and online now. People can pick it up. Folks, I really hope you enjoyed today's episode of Real Health. As ever, you know where we are, at Carl Henry PT on Instagram. realhealth@independent.ie is our email, and you can check us out on the Irish Independent website as well. Don't forget to rate and review. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week. Slán go fóill.